Wonderful. Thank you. Ah, you did it. Ah, that's amazing. That was one of those ideas that I had, when you're talking about making plans for how to get people to go to their rooms. And I said, we should have a bell. We should have, and everyone laughed at me. But Marcus, you did it. I'm so impressed and proud. Thank you. Yay. Okay, so welcome back after lunch. And as you know, that there are multiple tracks and whatnot, but in this room, everything is recorded and will be available online. So what we're saying will be made, available to the public, which I think is really exciting because we are brought together by UNESCO this afternoon. So wonderful. The title of this session is looking at research cooperation on ethical AI between Germany and African countries. And sort of asking the question or putting forward the statement, is such collaboration or cooperation an instrument to decolonize AI and to strengthen digital sovereignty? So it's really an open question. Is this what we can achieve, or is there something else that we should be taking into consideration? And so the emphasis or the initiative for the panel comes from the UNESCO recommendations on the ethics of AI, looking at measures to overcome the challenges when it comes to collaboration or cooperation between the two, between Germany and African countries. So this is really a response to the recommendations that UNESCO has put forward. Now, the format of what we will do in the next hour and a half is we will have the three speakers on the panel each have a moment, 10 to 15 minutes or 20 minutes to do sort of a position statement, to give their opinion on the question overlying the entire session. Each of the three will have the opportunity to do that, and then I will invite the three of them to come to the stage, or the two of them and a virtual guest joining us to come to the stage so that we can have a conversation together as well as engage with the audience both in person and online. So I begin with the first speaker, Dr. Maximilian Müngersdorff. Müngersdorff? Es tut mir leid, ich lerne jetzt Deutsch, weil das ist sehr kompliziert. Dr. Maximilian works as program specialist for emerging topics and science at the German Commission for UNESCO. In the field of science, he particularly focuses on matters surrounding open science, including open access, citizen science, and dialogue with other knowledge systems. Regarding emerging topics, his main focus is on facilitating the implementation of the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, including its regulations against AI-induced discrimination. So please take the stage, Maximilian. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy, for this nice introduction. And don't worry, even native German speakers have problems with my name, so that's no. Yeah, thank you very much for having me. A warm welcome also from my side to this afternoon session after lunch. I hope we keep you awake. We at first we would like to start with a short Mentimeter just to know with whom we are in the room, both physically and also virtually, who is with us. So you see here a code for menti.com for the website. So it would be great if you would take part in this small survey, also digitally, and so we have a better feeling who is with us today. Not really surprisingly, most people are obviously from academia. We have a couple of persons also from civil society, and also a couple of persons from the private sector. So at least a little bit of a mixture. That's great. Could we have the next question, please? So now this is a little bit more complex than the first question, since we are talking about research cooperation between African countries and Germany. It would be nice if you would answer the following questions. So what are, in your view, success factors for beneficial research cooperation between international partners, especially on AI topics, but not necessarily? I mean, of course, these are sometimes quite, or also quite. It's a general issues, right? General question. Okay, so of course, money. So you need funds. And I think sustainable funding is also quite an important thing, because of course it's often the case that you make up a nice project and you have people to collaborate with and a good structure, and then funding breaks away and kind of everything that you build up disappears. You need trust, of course, between the people in those networks, which is also very crucial and often missing, especially in international cooperation projects. Passion, equitable partnerships, which is on collaboration on equal terms is also quite key. Flexibility, passion. Yeah, great. Thank you very much for these insights. I think we will talk about many of these issues in the next 1.5 hours. So now, please, the slides of my presentation. Great, thank you very much. So what I would like to talk to you now is the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI, fostering global AI cooperation between Germany and Africa. In my talk, I will first demonstrate in how far the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI represents actually a framing document for an ethical AI development and use on a global scale. And in the second part, I will then present some key challenges for ethical AI development in Africa and pose the question in how far research cooperation between African countries and Germany may become one part of the solution to cope with those challenges. So first, at the beginning, the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI. Here you see the front page of this document, and actually such recommendations of the UNESCO are normative instruments of which each word is agreed upon by all 193 UNESCO member states. So it's a very intense negotiation process. And this particular recommendation on the ethics of AI was adopted in November 21, so around 1.5 years ago. The negotiation process before that was very intense. It was very controversial, and especially the German government, together with others, pushed for a strong human rights language in the recommendation, which was actually quite successful in the end. So member states found in the end a consensus and adopted this first international legal text to ensure that any organization, individual person, or also organization who develops or implements AI does so in an ethical way in line with human rights. And it is also the first international legal text that focuses on the different development levels of countries, the needs of the global south. So it was really a global process that puts very much an emphasis on also incorporating the voices from the global south and also the interests of marginalized and vulnerable groups. With regard to content, the recommendation acts as a kind of a guideline to all governments for creating laws and strategies for AI systems. So it is not a law, or not as concrete as a law as itself, but it rather has it works on a more abstract level, I would say. The recommendation determines concrete tasks for action to the UNESCO member states in 11 policy areas, of which 2 are development and international cooperation, and education and research. And probably to give you an idea of the level of the recommendations regulation, I would like to provide two short spotlights on these policy areas. First, in the area of development and international cooperation, the recommendation says that member states should, for instance, work to promote international collaboration on AI research and innovation, including research and innovation centers and networks that promote greater participation and leadership of researchers from low and middle income countries. So this is especially about the support for African states in AI development and increased cooperation between states of the global south and global north are here in the focus of the recommendation. Then in the field of education and research, one of the regulations of the recommendation is that member states should encourage private sector companies to facilitate the access of the scientific community to their data for research, especially in low and middle income countries. If you're interested in more information about about the recommendation, you can try this link, or also just grab of those publications that you find outside. This is a small brochure where we kind of present the recommendation in a nutshell. So let's come now to the challenges for ethical AI development in Africa, and in this following part I will actually present some key challenges for ethical AI development in Africa based on insights from a workshop we had in the German Commission for UNESCO on the topic in November 22 with experts from Germany and experts from different African states. So, what did they say? At first, one of the central challenges was insufficiently implemented or lacking regulations in many, but not all, African countries, leading to a lack of accountability and/or ethics dumping, and also risks for the right to privacy and data protection. Then you have challenges regarding human capacity and AI, and also digital literacy gaps as a further barrier for action on ethical AI, also leading to gaps in data security and protection. And then you have actually the very big field, as most of you know, of missing data in many African countries. So leading to risks of discrimination, fairness, as input data for AI is not available in sufficient quantity and also in sufficient quality. One reason why this base is largely missing is language diversity, making it difficult to generate diverse and rich data sets. And even if such databases are available, they are often generated and actually also owned by big tech companies that are actually not situated in the continent. So it's not owned by the people in the country, in the countries and in the continent. Another reason for missing data are lacking local AI companies and startups in many, though not all, African countries. So we have startups in many countries, in Ghana, in Rwanda, in South Africa. So there are countries with quite good conditions, but not everywhere. So three central underlying reasons for this are lacking access to funding for private AI initiatives. So many startups are kind of spin-offs from non-profit organizations and have received their seed funding, for instance, through the university, but struggle then to attract follow-up funding. So this was defined as a big problem, and leading to structural problems in research funding and funding from international donors. And then as a second underlying reason is sometimes opaque structures of communication and cooperation between government and private sectors, especially for startups. So this is again a barrier for public-private partnerships. And if those partnerships exist, they are often rather with big tech companies and not with local firms and local startups. And third reason is that part of this rather structural problem is also a lack of tech transfer from universities to the private sector due to the also known problem of brain drain of top scientists and top researchers from Africa to European or countries or North America. So, as a third and last point, I would like to focus on research cooperation to foster ethical AI development in Africa as one instrument to overcome those challenges. Maybe as a general observation before, of course, generally more research is needed to better understand the reasons for those challenges and others that I didn't tell now. And to define ways to overcome them, to in effect also strengthen African data sovereignty and ethical AI development. On the other hand, we also see great flagship projects that show how new kind of international research cooperation in the field should be designed. One of those projects is the Responsible AI Network, the RAIN Africa network, of which you will learn more about in a minute from Joyce and from Caitlin. Some key success factors of international research cooperation between Germany and African countries, mentioned again by the participants during the conference last year. The first one is, and this is also really overarching and central success factor, that you need an equal status of the partners from Germany and African states in the project setup. So this cooperation on equal terms is really a prerequisite for a trustful atmosphere between the partners, and I think it was also mentioned at the Mentimeter. So that's really key. Then you need also a longer-term project funding. I think you've also mentioned sustainable funding, which is more or less the same, right? So that not all that you established during the 2 or 3 time project period just breaks away, but that it kind of that you think about what you're doing with those good structures at a later point. And then more time and funding also in the initiation phase of an international research project, as it can take a long time actually to identify suitable partners to establish international research cooperation. Funding should also be used to establish PhD positions in African countries, not just to get those people here to counter brain drain. Then you need, this is also I think very key, a joint identification of research topics, because up to now so far research questions are usually defined by German or European funding institutions, and not always which is not always in the interest or relevant to the partners in African countries, or the partners the research is actually about on the ground. Then participants also ask for more flexibility in the use of the funds, for instance by being open to the expansion of the collaboration, by allowing other like-minded organizations to join, being more open to multi-actor partnerships, as research in African countries does not necessarily primarily take place in universities. Then the appointment of focal persons, a further success factor to drive the collaboration, that kind of organize the whole project. Frequent meetings of partner institutions to plan and execute agreed activities, and in the end also the creation of open formats and sufficient time to get together. So maybe in the end, very short conclusion on the question whether the recommendation on the ethics of AI has the potential to foster global AI cooperation between Germany and African countries. I think many parts of the recommendation actually touch upon the outlined challenges in Africa for ethical AI development. So, for instance, it has regulations to improve the AI literacy in countries, or to boost local data generations. So these are all steps in the right direction. Beyond, the recommendation also clearly outlines the need for more international research cooperation on AI ethics, referring also to the need of an equal status between the project partners. So in the end, yes, the recommendation has, I think, the potential to effectively to foster effective and fair structures of research cooperation between countries of the continent and Germany, if, of course, the provisions are implemented. And this is, of course, the big challenge that is in front of us. It's still a recommendation, so it's a rather soft international law, but still Africa as a continent is in the focus of UNESCO, and many activities are actually running at the moment, are focusing on the African continent to foster the implementation of the recommendation there. So I would say that there's good reasons to hope that the recommendation has positive signals also on the African continent. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so thank you, Maximilian. I already have a list of questions that I'd like to ask, but as we agreed before, we'll wait and give the 3 speakers their chance, and then we'll do questions together on the stage. So the next speaker who's joining us is Joyce. And Joyce is going to speak about AI development and data sovereignty in Africa, status quo and the role of international research projects. Now, Joyce, Nakatumba-Nabende, I hope that was close. My name is Amy Van Weinsberger, so nobody gets it right, but I hope that was close for you, Joyce. Joyce is a lecturer in the Department of Computer Science at Makerere. Can you also pronounce the university for me in Uganda?
Makerere.
Makerere.
Yes.
Wonderful. So Joyce is a lecturer in the Department of Computer Science at Makerere University in Uganda and heads the Makerere Artificial Intelligence Lab, which is also part of RAIN Africa, which we will hear more about from Caitlin after this. Joyce's research interests are in artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, and responsible AI. Currently, she is carrying out research in several areas, including application of computer vision, machine learning, and natural language processing in the areas of health and agriculture in the developing world. She is also a board member of Data Science Africa, which aims to grow data science professionals in Africa. So really looking forward to hear your talk, Joyce. Thank you. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
We're getting there. It's just loading right now.
Okay.
So maybe just give us a second. Still loading. There we go. We can see it. Oh, yep, we can see it now, Joyce. Thank you.
For that, yeah. So as introduced, I'm called Joyce Nakatumba-Nabende from Makerere University. So I'll just give a brief really about the lab so that get to know what we're doing just briefly. So one of the broad aims of the lab is around research, where we focus on development and prototyping of new technologies. And here we focus on matching a good local problem with a computational tool. So for example, if there's a problem that the agriculture experts are facing in agriculture, we try to provide a computational tool for them, which can be able to solve that problem. And many of the computational tools that we're working with are usually machine learning or AI based. And then on top of that, we also try to do outreach where we focus on deployment and use of the technologies for the end users. We always ensure that the work that we do in the lab that is matched with a local partner or a local beneficiary, such that at the end that there's continuity in the work, but also that we can be able to see the impact and the sustainability of the AI solutions that we have developed. And because we are located within a university, we also focus on capacity building, where we have students that are training that we collaborate with in the lab, who are both undergrad and graduate students. So the way we do our work, we kind of try to follow this canvas for AI development. Our focus, again, is always on social impact, but we really begin with a problem in the community with a local end user who's going to use the solutions that we are developing. Then we work around these data systems. Data, as already mentioned, is such a big issue. When you're starting to build out AI models on the African context, because you do not want to just get data that is already out there, because it might not be representative of the context in which you're developing the models. So data is a big thing, and many times we really engage with the domain experts. We develop the data collection systems and tools ourselves. We deploy, we collect the data, we make sure that the data is balanced and representative, and we go through several aspects around the ethics in the data collection process, and then move on to model development, deployment of the tools that we have developed, making sure that we can monitor them, feedback and maintenance, and ensure that at the end of the day, the tools that we have impact, have sustainability on specific communities. So that's kind of the pipeline that we try and follow. So I'll just give one example of one of the applications that we worked on previously, which is really around image-based disease diagnosis, where we have a smallholder farmer, or we have an agriculture expert who takes a mobile phone, goes to their garden, takes an image, and the expert, or the mobile phone, is able to tell the agriculture expert or the farmer the particular disease that's going on. So for example, it's able to classify and say this is maybe this particular disease. And we can take that a notch further and give even recommendations saying, if you find this disease, this is what you need to do. So I like this because it's a local problem. We have an end user who's a smallholder farmer, but we can also work very closely with the agriculture experts, which is the national organization in Uganda that regulates and is in charge of coming up with better varieties of cassava. This example here is a cassava plant, such that at the end of the day, that we have buy-in both from the smallholder farmers, but we also have buy-in from government, from the authorities that are in charge of research and doing the work. So that's the kind of pipeline that we try to follow. It's more complicated than what I've presented, but it provides a way to explain the previous slide. So moving on to the ethical challenges in AI development, I was glad that many of the things that I was going to talk about, I think have really been mentioned in the UNESCO guidelines and also came out of the workshop that was carried out. These are really things that we see as we're trying to think about the development of AI and considering the ethical challenges that would occur. These are many of the things that could come out. So I felt this is good because sometimes there's a lot of excitement around AI. And for example, the idea that I pointed out of using maybe a machine learning model on a mobile phone, where a farmer has to go take a picture and maybe send the picture to a server, and then the server is able to do that diagnosis and send it back to the farmer. That is if the model is not deployed locally on the phone. Already that would fall flat if you do not have internet penetration, as it is in maybe some parts of Africa where not everyone, one, has access to a mobile phone, two, not everyone has access to internet. So that could already be a barrier around using AI technology. Other things could be, for example, technology adoption. Usually when you start with saying, we're going to use AI, of course, it has to be embedded in a certain particular device or a certain technology. But many times, even the people for which we want to use these AI technologies, for example, are not educated enough, or they have phobia for technology, and that could be an issue. Another issue could be the civil and political stability, the legal regulatory infrastructure that has already been mentioned, and I'll discuss a little bit further on down the line. But the main issue is around the data sovereignty. That's really is always the issue. So if we have people who want to start out with doing AI and they come and they say, oh, I'm interested in AI, do you have data we can work with? Do you have data that I can play with? Do you have data where I can start to learn a few steps, for example, in data preprocessing, data cleaning, data preparing for machine learning? That's always the issue. And so there's always this inequality that will hinder the development of AI-based solutions, even when, you're able to, you have access to all the good models, but if you don't have the local data sets that can help you to come up with a solution in the particular context that we are in Africa, that's going to be a big issue. So the amount, the quality, the representativeness, because sometimes you have the data, but it's not representative enough. I think the issue that was mentioned was the language data, where, in Africa, if you want to come up with a solution for language, not everyone speaks English, but not everyone speaks the local language in a country. So in Uganda, we have several local languages. So if you want to come up with a technology, you have to make sure that you come up with technologies that are speaking to other languages that are represented in the country. And so that representativeness, the amount of data that you need, the quality of data that you need to do that can be very, very difficult and very expensive. So this preparedness in terms of the data is such a big issue for us in Africa. But most importantly, when you begin to think about the ethical challenges, as mentioned, these data collection efforts can come up and say, oh, we're going to provide a grant or provide funding for you to collect the data that you can use. But where the end users of the data are located? Okay, so that's a big issue. One of the type of work that we try to do is try and make sure that we build our data sets. We make sure that they're openly and readily available online, such that when someone wants to start using our data, that it's there, because that's one of the principles that we thought is important, because we struggled to come up with the data, especially when we were, for example, starting out on our NLP path. And so we said, okay, when we create our data sets, let's ensure that they're available online. But when you do that, then who are the end users of the data? Where are they located? A company recently approached us and said, oh, we're interested in this data set. Can we be able to use it for making for profit. And then that brings back that thing that we have to be very cautious about, the licenses for which the data is being put out there. What are the licenses? What was the goal for which the data is being collected and being put out there? So those are the things that we have to think about. Is the data open? Is it accessible? If it is open, if it is accessible, what are the licenses? What are the hindrances in using this data? Is it that everyone can be able to have access to it? And those are the ethical things that we have to think about as we are doing research. Another thing that is important, I think, for us and that we've encountered is the thing around transparency and explainability as an ethical challenge. And I put this chest X-ray image here because, of course, as a doctor, they want to understand how the AI system is working, its interactions, and also understand the outcome of the model. If you're saying that the model is going to say that the chest X-ray has pneumonia, for example, how did the model deduce that the chest X-ray has pneumonia? Can we be able to provide explainability? Because that's the way that the medical doctors think about this. They want to trust the model, but they want to also trust and say, can you explain further the underworking of the models? And so this is something that I think is a challenge that we have to ensure that when we build the models, that there's enough information that serves as a basis for the prediction, the recommendation, or the decisions. And I put the ChatGPT or any other large language model that's readily available. I think one of the things that we all are grappling with is we don't know the data that was used to train these models, right? So if you wanted to understand how they perform or how they are working, that's always a challenge because we don't know the training data. So they say they scrapped the net, got good data, but that's not good enough because there's a lot of information out there on the internet that might not be relevant or that might not be important as we are trying to build models. So this is a big thing around both the data and the models as we're trying to build and understand our explainability. And moreover, when we look at these models, how do they even work for our context, our African context, language? How do they work for our languages? And these are many of the ethical challenges that we, I think about. Inclusion, I think this is also related to the UNESCO principles around age, gender, diversity. Who are the benefits of the AI technologies that we're building? Do we take that into consideration? And I showed the other AI system life cycle, because at the end of every life cycle, there are people who are involved. It's not that you're building or that the AI systems are being built out of the blue, but there are people who are involved, people from whom we are collecting the data, people from whom we're going to test the AI models on. For example, if you build a model for cervical cancer screening, there's a woman who you're going to get an image from to test. So there are people who are from which we are collecting the data, from which we have to test. So inclusion is very important. Bringing the human back as we build these AI systems, I think, is a very important ethical consideration. And also that it's not discriminatory in terms of maybe their socioeconomic status, their ethnicities, their cultures, that these are all taken into consideration as we continue to build our AI models. And then legal frameworks. I think this is also in the UNESCO recommendations. Do we have frameworks around AI development and deployment? At least in Uganda, we do not have an AI framework yet. So if you were to come up with an AI model and you wanted to deploy it, who would govern that model? What laws would govern that model? We have a data protection law, but we don't have a framework to guide the use and the implementation of AI. And according to a study that was carried out in 2022 on the African context, I think it was only Malaysia at that time that had an AI governance framework. But there are all those companies in many countries, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa, where there's a lot of AI systems that are actually being developed and being used. And I think these legal frameworks are very important because they cover several areas, which I already mentioned earlier, that are important for the actual use of AI systems. So as I close, when we think about the African-German partnerships, how does this work? And what comes to mind is that when we think about these partnerships, again, it's driven because of the system life cycle, right? That it comes from, if we were to have these partnerships, can we think about access and quality of data and also the AI technology? If there's data on the African context, if there's data maybe outside the African context that would benefit during research on the African context, how can we have access to it? African context, how can we be able to prepare the data that can easily be used to form partnerships that are meaningful to develop the AI technologies. And how can we do this in accordance with the relevant national, regional, and international frameworks that I have already mentioned? And I think one of the collaborations that is helping us to frame this is the RAIN Africa, which Caitlin will talk about, which provides a framework for the collaboration between the African and German academics to work together on development and use of AI in Africa. And I think this has been a helpful framework for us to see how to frame this partnership and collaboration. And we believe that the lessons that are learned from the cross-learning between the North and the South can be drawn into different partnerships that can test and implement a common and a minimum AI governance framework. Once this framework is in place, once we know how this partnership can be structured, I think this can be a very important way to nurture and to improve these African and German partnerships, because we've kind of understood that there are all these ethical guidelines, all these ethical challenges that are considering, that we have to consider that are in place. And so coming up with these different partnerships or frameworks, we can be able to kind of reflect back on this and see how to address them moving upwards, because we kind of understand them, and then we want to form these different collaborations between Africa and German, especially in AI research. Yeah, so I will stop there. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you for that, Joyce. And so don't go anywhere. Stay there, because we're going to have you join us again when we all come to the stage. So now I'm really curious to hear more about RAIN Africa, because Joyce has set it up for us. So I'm really curious to see to learn more about what the partnerships or collaborations look like between Germany and Africa. So our third speaker of the session is Corrigan from the Technical University of Munich and RAIN Africa. And Caitlin is going to be talking to us about this responsible AI network, Africa RAIN, so that's the acronym RAIN Africa, to give us insights and the success factors of the work that they've been doing so far. So Dr. Corrigan is the Executive Director for the Institute for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence at TU Munich. Dr. Corrigan is responsible for the development and coordination of all of the Ethics in Artificial Intelligence Institute's work and administrative activities, and coordinates the Responsible AI Network, which is the RAIN Africa network. She holds a PhD in Public and International Affairs from the University of Pittsburgh. Her research interests include good governance, sustainable development, and corporate social responsibility, particularly in developing country settings. So thanks very much. The floor is yours, Caitlin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here, and as Max and Joyce have already really kind of built up what RAIN Africa is all about, but I'll take a step back, because I think part of what we're interested in is how the Responsible AI Network Africa kind of came into being, and what successes and challenges we've seen with that to learn about partnering. Here. Oh, there we go. So first I'll just say a little bit about the Institute for Ethics in AI. So we really came out of the Technical University of Munich's focus on human-centered engineering. And what we do is we support and coordinate interdisciplinary research to generate global and fair guidelines for ethical development and implementation of AI throughout society. So really moving beyond the question of what is possible in AI to say what should be possible in AI, and how do we make sure as many people as possible benefit from its development. And we do this using a completely always an interdisciplinary approach. So all of our projects involve principal investigators or people from multiple fields or sectors, bringing together things like business and computer science, or medicine and engineering, to work on different applications of AI. And we work across a lot of different sectors, and this is all just by way of saying why we came to this topic at all. Because we are very interested in things like sustainable development, AI for social impact, as well as thinking about the ethical repercussions of AI in all sectors. To this end, also a big part of our institute, a part of our platform, is stakeholder engagement. So through open access publications, public events, published reports, online AI ethics training, we try to bring our research to applied stakeholders that can implement it and apply it. So that's policymakers as well as industry and people like that. So a few things we have there are the Global AI Ethics course that we help run, which brings together lecturers from all over the world to talk about different AI ethics subjects and putting out things like kind of policy-oriented research briefs. Additionally, and while we're getting quickly to RAIN Africa, we have led the way in establishing networks to connect researchers over this topic, right? So AI ethics is a topic that's changing and evolving and growing every day, and you know, our thought is that we don't need to operate in silos on this. We need to all work together. It's a big enough space that I think there's enough space for everyone to really share what they're working on, make sure we're working together on it, make sure we're getting global and diverse and inclusive perspectives, because AI ethics is not one thing and shouldn't be concentrated in one place geographically either. And so through that, we've established the Global AI Ethics Consortium, which is looking kind of at thinking about AI ethics across the globe with partners on all 6 continents. And then in addition to that, we've also helped with our partners in Ghana and now throughout Africa, put together the Responsible AI Network Africa, which is what we're talking about today. And I think so the Responsible AI Africa's goal is to bring together emerging and established all researchers working on AI ethics as it applies to the African continent. That could be people from Europe working on topics that relate to AI and how it's being developed and used in Africa, and of course bringing together researchers working on the African continent as well. But I start with this KNUST, which is a university in Ghana, and Technical University Partnership, because that's actually really what allowed us to even start thinking about this topic. So thinking about ways we can establish partnering, I think one really important thing we see in academia are these strategic partnerships that are being built across academia. And TUM has done that with many partners around the world, but KNUST in particular has been a really successful model we've had. Through this partnership at KNUST and TUM, we as the IAI, and you know, a lot of this can be kind of random or also just based on people's interests. A doctoral student of ours was from Ghana, knew professors there, had been at KUNST, and said, hey, I have a professor I want to partner with there, let's work on something together. And we came up with a proposal to build this network and got some funding because of the partnership between KNUST and TUM. We were able to get funding from TUM because they support projects that bring those 2 universities together. But our goal was wider than that because we wanted to bring people together from across the whole continent. So we got this initial funding, and we began it as an initiative between the 2 universities in 2020, focusing on emerging researchers in Africa and also focusing on the use of AI for sustainable development, as that is kind of a focus of the KNUST-TUM relationship as well, thinking about sustainable development. So a small group we brought together and just kind of started talking to as many people as would listen to us and who were interested in it, and have continued growing to have partners in, I think, over a dozen countries in Africa now, and I'll tell you about some of our outreach. So our main focus has been on outreach, on connecting people, on bringing topics that are important to researchers in Africa to kind of a stage. So we've done that through promoting the topic of responsible AI with work, since we started in 2020, kind of in the middle of when no one was allowed to go to physical workshops, a lot of virtual workshops with people from many different countries in Africa. We have a strong social media following. We've connected, we have research country representatives in many different countries. And so we've allowed people to kind of bring their research to the front with this kind of mechanism of these online workshops. In addition to that, we partnered with the GIZ, the GIZ, which is many things here in Bonn in this area, to work on a book on looking at AI ethics specifically in higher education in Africa. And I can talk about some of the challenges that we found through that book as well. So that was a book we put out, and additionally, in March, we finally were able to have our first in-person meeting in Ghana as the Responsible AI Conference, which brought together over 500 people over 2 days, to talk about these topics as well. So we're slowly kind of building a base, having events, and letting people's research come to the forefront through this partnership. So I will just talk a little bit about this, and then hopefully we can get into the discussion of thinking about fostering equitable partnership, which is kind of the topic of this panel. And I think between Joyce and Max, you already mentioned a lot of these. I think for us, things we have seen, again, is this sustainability of funding, of thinking about long-term investment in these projects, these type of projects that we're looking at. Flexibility of funding, I think, is really important when we're talking about looking at partnerships between the global north and global south, for a lack of better terms, that we have to think about what type of partners are allowed. We found that when we're looking with our Global AI Ethics Consortium or the Responsible AI Network Africa, we have to kind of get out of the mindset of how kind of the academic university system works in Europe and what other types of partners might be out there working on things that are of interest to everyone, and how we can bring them in even if they don't follow that kind of classic university setup that we have here. The other thing I can think of, I mean, especially for a network like ours, and I think generally if you're talking about institutional building, capacity building, not just thinking about funding, even though I think it's really important to fund doctoral students and direct research like that, but thinking about funding also kind of the coordination side of things, the capacity building side of things, because those things are almost always left out of any research proposal you can apply for or funding you can apply for. And especially we're talking about often underfunded educational systems. The university itself doesn't have the capacity to put people like that in place either, so flexibility of funding in that regard as well. Promotion of activities across sectors. This is again being kind of flexible in who's allowed to get involved in the research cooperation, what fields are we bringing in, is ethics or responsible AI being a priority and not just kind of what we talked about this morning, the fix at the end, the checklist at the end. Can we actually get funding on thinking about responsible use, on thinking about sustainable use, on thinking about ethics of AI, and not just that as kind of like the sidebar or the afterthought. And again, I think we've mentioned this a lot today, but considering the applicability and sustainability of the data and the tools, is the tools or data use or tools being developed applicable in the settings that we're putting it in, or do we have to think of things like data bias and Afrocentric data collection and things like that? So I'll just leave it there because I think the discussion will bring up a lot more things.
Great. Okay, thank you. So then Max. So I'm inviting Max and Caitlin to join the stage, and then Joyce, I hope you're still there. Yeah, great. Okay. And I can take this microphone. Yes. It's on? Yes, wonderful. Then just a note for the people who are joining us online, please use the Q&A function to ask your questions. And you want me to bring the computer with me so that I can get the questions? Yeah, okay. So I'm coming, so also people in the audience, get your questions ready too while I'm getting set up here. This is weird if I'm sitting over here, just so we can see Joyce. Okay, wonderful. So that's a lot of information that we've all just taken in, yeah? So if we can, start going through some questions. First, before I go through my own questions, does anyone from the audience want to start by asking a question? Yeah, please. Sorry, just 1 second. Luca is going to bring a microphone for you, just to make sure that the people online can hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, hi, I'm Ishu. I'm currently working on comparing dominant or emerging imaginaries of AI governance in China, Germany, and the US. And at the moment, I'm looking at companies' imaginaries of AI governance. And three according to my analysis, three imaginaries are really at the moment gaining momentum. One is AI for sustainable development, one is trustworthy AI, one is responsible AI. And I noticed that, Caitlin, in your talk, it's more of the responsible AI, and also in Joyce's talk. I wonder, is there a difference in the so-called responsible AI that you envision from, the European Union trustworthy AI, and what's the similarities and differences between this term, and what's your emphasis on that? And another question I have is both for Maximilian and Caitlin. So in my observation, a lot of companies, when they want to justify, okay, we are doing a lot of work for AI governance, and then they throw out, like, we sign up for UNESCO guidelines, we had partnership with IEAI. That's mentioned a lot. I found it on Facebook's content, Huawei's content. So they sort of use these partnerships as a kind of like showing that they've done enough. But as outsider, how is there what can be the ways that we assess and we learn, we assess the success, or we learn from the difficulties, the failures in this partnership? I'd love to hear your insights on this. Thank you.
I mean, I can speak to the first question first, I guess. And I was recently on another panel also about responsible AI, where it was like the first time they said, I want everyone to kind of go through and define what responsible AI is. And I guess we tend to use them kind of interchangeably: responsible, ethical, trustworthy. I mean, for me, when you talk about responsible AI, I would say it includes both the ethical side and the trustworthy side. And in Europe, I would say trustworthy tends to go very quickly to kind of like the functionality of the tool, right? Is it going to work? Is it going to be reliable? And responsible obviously goes beyond that. So I think kind of combining that trustworthy aspect and that ethics aspect together kind of gets you more towards the responsible AI. I don't know. We're the Institute for Ethics and Artificial Intelligence, but I like to go beyond ethics because I think it can be a little too defining. So I think that's why I like to use the responsible, because I think it also then makes us think about the life cycle, a little bit what Joyce was talking about, not just thinking about the reliability or how we're building the tool, but also the impact of it, how it's deployed, how it's used or misused, and those type of factors. So that's why I would include those. Do you want to first?
Yeah, I think you put the question whether kind of companies can more or less subscribe to the UNESCO recommendation and then put it in their reports and say, look, we've kind of follow those UNESCO defined rules. So I mean, quite generally, the recommendation or recommendations of the UNESCO in general are something. Or you cannot as an private company, you cannot kind of subscribe to them or something. It's not like a pledge or something from like other UN organizations or international organizations do, that you can subscribe to it as an organization or a company or something. But it's really an international law text that has to be implemented by the states, so by the national states. And one instrument to actually implement the recommendation are ethical impact assessments. So one rule of the recommendation is that for any kind of AI system, an ethical impact assessment is done for the whole life cycle of the AI system. So from the very beginning, designing of the AI system until termination. So questions regarding what are you doing with the data collected? Are they disappearing or not? So so now the UNESCO headquarters are currently designing this ethical impact assessment tool, and then national states are asked to really implement it together with their standard setting institutions. Think about how to really do it in practice. And then you can actually see whether AI systems of companies adhere to this system or not. And another challenge in this regard is, of course, that you also have to think about parallel systems, especially the EU AI Act with the risk-based assessment. So it would of course make a lot of sense if there is not an ethical impact assessment tool of UNESCO for AI systems and another one from the European Union. But you of course have to kind of think, or politicians need to think, and standard setting institutions need to think about how to combine those different tools and put it in practice together.
So if I can interject with another question following up on what you just said, Maximilian. You were talking about the ethical impact assessment, beginning at the very early stages of design. How are you, what kind of training data are you using and whatnot? I would suggest that design happens, or the ethics questions come even before you start talking about the design of the algorithm. So one of my researchers is looking at mining conditions, right? And so we're talking about a physical infrastructure that requires raw earth minerals, and those are coming from places where people are treated awfully, where the communities are destroyed because of the soil contamination, the water contamination. So is this also going to be a part of the ethics assessment? What's happening on a much broader scale? Because there's so many issues before we even get to the training of the system. The sourcing of the data, the collecting of the data, the labeling of the data, right? We've heard now that individuals in refugee camps and prisons are the ones who are labeling data. And so can a UNESCO ethics assessment take these considerations?
I think really regarding the question how seltene Erden, so how certain minerals you use for digital systems are collected or mined, I do not think that this is really covered by the recommendation, but things like, of course, energy use of data generation or browser centers, that is part of the recommendation. Also, the kind of data you're using, so that it's not discriminatory. So I mean the framework conditions. It's also very much about for instance, the composition of AI developing teams in companies. So this is also kind of a very, very early step in the AI development, right? So that it's not just digital experts that are sitting together there and making up the algorithm, but also people with a social science background, humanities background, ethics background. It's not just males; it's also females. It's also, so it's a representative kind of group. So I think many of those issues you have to think about at very early stages are in my view covered by the recommendation. Yes.
I mean, I think this is a really good example of why AI governance is so hard too, because it's not just one thing, and it's applied to a ton of different fields. So it's also why I usually talk about AI governance, not just AI regulation, because it can encompass all of these many things, but also how you're going to have things like the AI Act eventually coming into effect, but also we're going to have to think about how AI interacts with all these other regulations out there, like supply chain laws and transparency laws, right? Because they're all going to kind of be connected. So just taking that kind of wider view on it. And just building off quickly of what you're talking about assessments and how companies maybe can act like they're ethical or work with institutions like ours. I think it's going to become a lot more, especially as these regulations come into place, of companies trying to kind of figure out, like, how do we get someone to sign off and say our algorithm is fine or risk-free. I think they'll find very quickly that the university is probably not the fastest way for them to do that, because it's very hard to work with the university, and you can't do it quickly or anything. So I think probably an institute like ours will not be the type of place for that, but I think there's going to be a lot of demand for it.
No, I hear you. Sorry, Doji, before I get to your question, I'm just going to ask this one question that's online. This is a question to Joyce. And Anonymous is asking, I am wondering what models or machine learning algorithms are used to diagnose the plant disease. Is it also locally built models with the data set they curate? I appreciate the fact that they are working on getting more local data sets to help diagnose the disease, but I am also interested in knowing whether they also have local built models and algorithms for that. Joyce, can you answer that for the audience?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question. So the models that we use are usually the openly available models like CNNs, but what we try to do is we apply transfer learning on the local data sets. We also really aim to improve the models such that they can, for example, be deployed on the mobile phones, because as I said, this is a typical example of trying to have this solution deployed out on a mobile phone that, for example, a smallholder farmer can have access to. So we take many of the models, for example, the TensorFlow models, and focus on the TensorFlow Lite versions of these models, improve them, ensure that they can be deployed on what's available. So yes, we kind of try and fine-tune the models, change the parameters of the models, just to make sure that they can work for the local context that we have and the local data sets that we have developed. I hope that answers it. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Joyce. Doji. Maybe, Doji, could you also introduce yourself to the group so they understand your context and position here?
I'm from the University of Ghana and visiting researcher at the Sustainable AI Lab Bonn here. So I'm working on sustainable AI and mining futures, and with regards to how we can rethink about the global AI ethics debate, and in terms of the epistemic deficits in the debate, and what can Africa, with its traditional, rich ethical background in terms of Ubuntu, can also contribute to the discourse. And when you were talking, you spoke about how governance and perhaps institutions are trying to incorporate these ethical principles in their field work. Then you just reminded me of Microsoft just in March sacking all the board members, the ethic board members. And I could imagine the setback, and what UNESCO will say. I don't just think about it. But my main concern, I read a document from the European Environmental Bureau, and they're talking about how the demand, the luxury consumption of Europe is forcing countries in the sub-Saharan Africa to produce, to produce more for your consumption, the European Union consumption. And when they come out with their principles, they really don't talk about that. They just describe, but not prescribe. And that is a kind of concern. So I don't know what UNESCO would like to say about that. The other concern is that we find this in the AI industry, these companies being licensed by European institutions to mine, and in their documents, they just describe the situation. But they give licenses, they give authority to these individual companies to go into this global south, to just go and mine, take whatever they need. So it's like we know the problems, but we can't solve it. So I don't know how your framework, in terms of the UNESCO framework, tries to deal about this. If not today, maybe in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, the first question, yes, I think it was not only Microsoft who kind of get rid of people looking at the ethical impact of digital policies or AI, but it was also other companies recently. So, this is of course a very, very critical critical situation or a critical development. I mean, if you think, okay, you have first signs of an economic downturn, and the first people who have to go in AI companies are the ones dealing with ethical issues. So I mean, this is absolutely problematic. No question. But in the end, UNESCO as an international organization, I mean, we can of course put out a press release saying this is not a good development, and this is also not in the sense of not in the spirit of the UNESCO recommendation, which also includes AI ethics officers in companies as one instrument of AI ethics governance, actually. So this is actually one instrument also of the recommendation. But in the end, those rules have to be, as I said, implemented by the national states, and especially regarding private companies. Of course, you cannot tell them you have to hire ethics people. I mean, the way is you have to set clear rules on how ethical AI development and use should be done, and the clearer, stricter those rules are, the bigger the interest of the companies itself is to have such people in their staff, right? So I mean, that's the way you have to go here. I think, yeah.
Just one thing I actually meant to bring up in my slides too, and then I also have a question for Joyce, actually. But I think, again, going back to this idea of thinking about AI governance, I like to think about it as a big space coming from, all types of angles. And one thing I saw, at least when we were at KNUST, and I think I hope is somewhat representative, was the immense focus there on students, and students at all levels. We had 3 different high schools at our conference, all there learning, girls' high schools, all there learning about STEM, super interested in STEM, super interested in AI. And if you can start already at the high school level, at the undergrad level, getting our future computer science engineers interested in ethical aspects and responsible use of AI, they're the ones in the room, right? They're the ones in the room actually developing the thing and needing to ask the questions. So I think thinking about these bottom-up approaches and these top-down approaches at the same time will make a big difference. And I was very, very happy to see when we went to Ghana to see that was a huge focus for the responsible AI lab we work with there. Yeah, so I just wanted to add that in.
Joyce, do you want to comment on that question as well?
Yeah, thanks. I think I as not speaking for UNESCO, but I think like for the private companies, there's really not much we can do, right? Because they probably had their reasons why they fired their ethical people and everything. But thinking about it from as Kelly was saying, from the perspective of academia, and also I think she mentioned much earlier that when we think about ethics, I think this shouldn't really be an afterthought, right? Because many people, when they are maybe designing curricula or focusing on what to teach, of course they will all start with the core things around AI, but throw ethics away like it's just something that you think about later. Yeah, they take it like it's an, I don't know, an arts or something in quotes. It's not really important. And yet it's something that really governs the development, the use, the deployment of the technology. So I think trying to bring this at the forefront, even in the academia, as we teach, as we develop the models, as we deploy, I think that's something that I can add. And hopefully starting the bottom up, that can be something that can grow and help even as people are churned out and end up, in industry, for example. And then maybe that's the approach that we try to take as well. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Modesta. I think we just need the microphone so that the people online can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you. I stepped out briefly, but I don't know if you touched on this subject. So I'm also a guest researcher at Professor Weinsberg's Institute, and I am interested in gender interpretations of most of the phenomenon around us. and also coming from Africa, Ghana to be specific, I am interested in your close relationship with African countries and what your experience has been in terms of the influence, relationship, impact of AI and the women in these African groups that you work with. What has their experience been? Involvement of women in AI, impact, social, environmental integrity of how AI is affecting all of these. What has your experience been as far as the experience and the lived experiences of these women are concerned in the areas you've been working?
To say too about this. I can just speak to in our work with KNUST in Ghana. I have to be honest, was a little disappointed when we were at the conference. I think I was the only female who's shared my research. I was very inspired by the fact that we had like over 100 girls from high school who were there, and they were asking such brilliant questions, and they would stand up and they were so confident, and so I have like a lot of hope that that goes into the next generation, or the people that are going to be coming to university very soon. But from the research side, I was quite disappointed that I was the only female sharing my research there. But I think certainly there was discussion of inclusion and diversity and the necessity of getting those voices in the room when we're designing AI. So I think that's becoming like more awareness about through the development of AI. We need to bring all those diverse voices into the room as we discuss impacts of it. But I, at least at the conference we were at, had yet to see them actually in the room to help discuss it with me. But yeah, I'd love to hear Joyce's opinion on.
Joyce, did you hear the question? Can you comment on the
question? Yes, I heard about it. I think she was asking really around women and their inclusion and involvement in AI systems and development. I think it's such a big thing that I don't think that we can exhaust it right now. So I've, of course, had experience in the development of models and looking at how women can be involved, and not just as end users, but also in the actual development of the systems, in the actual contribution of data. I think for me, I kind of feel like that's where it starts, because if you're going to start building AI models, you need the data. If you're getting data, can we even involve women at that point such that we can be able to understand, or women can also be able to understand the value for the data that's being collected? One of the projects that we had was building speech data sets for Uganda, which is a local language in Uganda. And we realized at that point that even as we are trying to reach out to communities, that women are important. So we had to ensure that our inclusion plan for the people we're collecting data from, that women is an important factor, that they are included as well, that they are, participating, that they understand the process. It was at that level such that at the end, when we looked at the data sets, that we found actually our data set had more female contributors compared to the male contributors, and I thought that was a good thing. But looking at also the research aspect, one of the work that we were doing is understanding people's perceptions on radio. That was during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we wanted to understand what were people saying on radio about the government interventions, the lockdown, the preventive measures, all those things, their sentiments. And one of the things that when you're doing research is to focus and put everyone in a bracket, and you think everyone's voices are the same, but not considering what males versus females look like. So we had to be very intentional as we were doing that research to think of, okay, if we're trying to get what people think, how do these people communicate on radio? They probably use mobile phones to call in. So if you're looking already about the ownership of mobile phones, we know that males will own the mobile phones more than the women, or males will even have the airtime to call into the mobile phones, to call into the radio station. So even at that point already, you can be able to understand the gender disparities between men and women as they are calling in, such that when you're trying to analyze that data, that you're already beginning to put a gender lens to it, to understand that this is not coming from one bracket, but there are differences within which male and females talk, the times when they call in, the things that they say, such that when you're doing the research, that you're breaking it down to this kind of analysis. So I think it's something, as I said, just like looking at AI ethics, that is something that is intentional. I feel like the same thing also has to come in with gender, that it's something that we have to think about at the very start if we're collecting data, if we are trying to analyze the data coming from the communities, that we also bring in that gender lens and then try and think about it, but also as a model developed, as a research is going on, that there's more female involvement. So maybe I will stop there for now. Thanks.
So I wonder, maybe also just building on Modesta's question, in Europe we find that at the the master's level, the PhD level, you have a wonderful representation of female scholars. And as you climb up the academic ladder, as you go to postdoc, assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, the numbers of women dwindle for a number of reasons, whether it's having children or having a gap in their academic career for something making it more difficult. And I can imagine that this is similar in Ghana. Actually, explicitly, we've talked about this, how difficult it is for women to continue through the academic chain. So I hear what you're saying, that you were optimistic seeing all of these young girls, but at the same time I have Modesta's voice in my head saying, it's not gonna stay like that, and so then what tools, it's one thing to say we want a framework for inclusion and diversity, but what tools, what mechanisms are actually gonna come from the RAIN network or from the UNESCO framework to change this cycle?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard. I mean, I hope that, networking, I think, provides support in any sort of network, right? So that you can see that there are, it's always good to see that there are other people like you and they're doing it and they're making it work, and hopefully they can reach out to them and mentor, or the other way around. So I'm hoping that this type of system can provide that type of just kind of reflection to have. And then, we use the RAIN Africa network in our chats and stuff to show a lot of opportunities. That's a lot of what I do. Like, we get, especially if the German government or the European Union or something has something that can support African researchers or African students, that's like what I'm doing. I'm sending it out and saying, hey, if you need help applying for this, just contact me. So I think the support factor, I think, is where the network can come in. This is possible, you can do it. But I agree, I was thinking about, as I was saying that, I was there were tons of high school students. I did see some undergraduate students. The Responsible AI lab that they have there has a lot of female student assistants, but when you got up to kind of the doctoral students and the people who would be presenting their research, it just wasn't there yet. Yeah.
And we'll talk about this more tomorrow. We have a panel on AI and gender. Do you want to ask another question?
So the support system that you talked about is really important. But when I was going through the recommendations that you presented right from the beginning before the other colleagues came, these are really brilliant factual recommendations, but I didn't see anything on the gender thing. And I was hoping to hear from you. Because, that is a big stage that if it's out there, it will be taken very seriously and practical measures will be put in place to check that.
It's actually, as I said, it's the recommendation covers 11 policy fields. I only showed you 2, the most relevant one for today, but one of those chapters or policy fields is also gender. So it's the first international law text actually also focusing on the topic of gender, like the gender aspect in development teams and companies, the gender aspect in data problems regarding discrimination, also very much focusing on primary and secondary schools. On the one hand, how to bring AI ethics into the curricula there, but on the other hand, also how to really supporting young girls in getting a foot in. And making their way on AI or digital issues, the STEM subjects. So there the recommendation is actually quite strong. When it's about academia and the very specific challenges women are confronted with when aiming to have a career in academia, I think these are not particularly addressed in the recommendation. These are really very, very deep structural problems in the German academic landscape, and I think obviously also internationally related to to the quite difficult working conditions very often, also regarding contracts and everything in academia, and the really that you're pushed to of course to work a lot, to publish a lot, more than normal. So very many different factors, but yeah.
I think it also, just thinking about what you're saying, talk goes back to our kind of other use of the term sustainable kind of funding and sustainable support, that it's not just getting the foot in the door or getting them into university, but making sure there's support systems the whole time, that they don't get disadvantaged in a way that male students don't along the way.
So I have a super provocative question for you. You had mentioned, Maximilian, on one of your slides, one of the points was lacking access to funding for private AI initiatives. So this was sort of, what are roadblocks or things to take into consideration when you want to help boost the AI industry in Africa. And when I was there in Ghana, of course, I was like, yeah, you should have AI ethics and you should be doing this and building this algorithm. And I remember after my talk sitting in the room, and many of the professors and students said, like, this is great, but we don't have enough energy for our lights to be powered at night. And now you're asking us to direct money and energy for artificial intelligence. Like, why? We have fundamental problems that come, way before worrying about artificial intelligence. So how do you also take that into consideration when, there's this pushing of let's get money for AI initiatives, let's have all of these partnerships, when many of the people that I've spoken with are just like, I want food on my table every day this week for me and my children. Then what do you say to those individuals or communities?
I think it's not an either or, right? I mean, you have those fundamental development problems of course, enough water, enough food, very basic education. I mean, we all know that, yes, but I mean if that means in the end that the African continent is not allowed to take part in very crucial economic developments like right now the development of AI systems, then I mean, that cannot be the solution, right? I mean,
if they say literally, we don't have the money.
Yeah, but on the other hand, the Makerere lab, Joyce told us about it, that she's heading, or also very many probably institutions you're working with, show that development on those AI-related issues in Africa is possible, and the startup scene exists in many countries. So you already have it. But I mean, the diversity of development levels of different parts of the society are, of course, much bigger than in many European countries. So you have to find different solutions for different kind of problem setups, kind of thing. Yeah.
Joyce, do you want to say anything about that?
I think it's a provocative question, but I guess generally thinking about it, I bet in the world we'll all never be at that same level where we have everything, even in Africa or even in Uganda, where we have access to everything. But I think, and then that should not be a problem that we should shy away from using AI systems, because I kind of feel like the kind of work we do of AI systems is really for social impact, right? That might even help to bridge some of these problems that are existing. So, for example, if it's access to clean water, but you're able to come up maybe with an application that's able to map where the clean water points are and give access that kind of information to people, maybe access to healthcare or things like that to help problems that are existing. I feel like AI has the potential, and I think it shouldn't be used as an excuse, but we should really just leverage on that to help us to build things that can help us for social impact. So I would take that problem and turn it around and see how to work with it to try and solve the problems that are existing on the continent. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Wonderful. So we have 3 minutes left before we have to before we have to close the panel. For Angela, I see your question, and I hope you're joining tomorrow when we're doing a specific panel on AI and gender. I see your question, and maybe I ask it tomorrow because I don't have enough time to do it. But thank you for asking. Talking about do those, including women, know what women want, and do we think about the dynamics that women are facing, and how do we address the issue of women inclusion? So similar to what we were just talking about. But in our last 2 moments, I thought, or 2 minutes, sorry, I thought maybe I give each of the three of you an opportunity to say a sort of closing sentence. What is it that you want the audience to take away from this panel or from the work that you're doing in particular? Optimism or curiosity or pessimism or what, but if you can each say one statement that you want the audience to have as their takeaway message, that would be great.
Okay. I don't know if this will sum it all up, but from the last conversation, it got me thinking about back to kind of the word decolonial in this conversation, and as we were talking about, they don't have, there's no money for it, or there's other more pressing things. I think also since we're talking about partnering and funding and things like that, the funders have a lot of power to dictate, right? As you were saying that, I'm like, well, but no one's giving money for malaria right now. They're giving it for AI, right? So that's like what people are going to work on, whether their lights are working or not. The funding's there to work on technology. So I think as kind of the funder side of things, there's a lot of power that's held to dictate the conversation completely. But I don't want to leave on only a depressing note. I think there's a lot of optimism about AI in Africa in particular, and I was really inspired as there with the type of things they're working on and the questions they're asking. So I think there's a lot to cooperate on.
Yeah, maybe what is in my view really important is to address this key issue that also came up during our conference, but also was in the room very often today, is this equal position in the research process, really from the beginning onwards. I think the donors, the funding organizations you were also talking about, really need to very much think about how to quite fundamentally change their structures and their rules for funding research to really develop research projects on AI ethics between the global north, especially Germany and African states, in the interests of those countries or those people. The research should be about, and I have the feeling, at least in Germany, that this kind of point that you need this equal positioning, real equal positioning, not just in some policy papers, is right now really getting quite big in the conversation, and I'm quite optimistic that we get better conditions in that respect.
Wonderful. Joyce?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess just thinking about it, and from the perspective, of course, of the African position and academia, I feel like right now, as Colin said, there's so much funding and so much focus on Africa, particularly AI as well. So funding in AI on the African continent, and I feel like that's something that we really need to tap into, but also especially try to do this for social good, right? Because then we keep saying that we have so many problems on the African continent, but if there is this interest in the field of AI on the African continent, I feel like that's a very important opportunity for us as Africans working on this research, but also developing systems and tools that can be able to solve the challenges, at least that we have, one step at a time. I feel we can't do everything, but we can start a step at a time and leverage the environment, leverage the funding and the opportunity that is currently existing right now. Yeah, thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, thank you very much to the three panelists that were here today. Thank you to the audience for being here in person, and to everyone who was there online and for asking your questions. It's great that we had a chance to hear about UNESCO's vision and framework for moving forward, because like Modesta said, if UNESCO says it, then the member states, are more inclined or obliged even to act. So good to hear that it's on the minds of those within UNESCO, and to learn about RAIN. So let's thank our panelists, and we have a break now before the next session happens, so enjoy some coffee and snacks.